Hi guys, welcome to this Western Bartonshire Libraries event. I'm Graeme Armstrong off of the Young Team and I'm going to be speaking to you today about my debut novel. I'm going to do a short talk to introduce myself, where I came from, who I am, how I got to writing the novel, chat around the novel. I'm going to give you a few short readings and then afterwards there's some Q&As that the audience have kindly sent in these crazy COVID times. Just before we get started, there's a couple of wee warnings. So the first one, if any of you know me and know the work, is a profanity warning. So there will be some strong language, guys. So if you've got any little ears listening, pop them off into the next room. The next one is a trigger warning. So we're going to be talking around violence and suicide today. So if you've got any experiences of that, guys, just be warned. And the final one is obviously it's a wee spoilers warning alert as well. So anyway, so welcome. I'm going to kick us off with a reading. I think it's best to get started, get some energy going, okay? The novel starts, it's around gang culture in Airdrie, in Coatbridge, inspired by my own experiences back then. And I'll read first, kick us off, guys. So the young team, who's our gang, has had a death threat painted on a wall in their area by the rival gang, the Young Toy, and they've been told by one of the parents to go up and clean it off. We all nod our thanks and start walking up to the top park. There's nothing to it really, just two swings and a wee shoot. This isn't our real hunt. The Waynes of the scheme tend to have this part to themselves. And you often see a squad of moz with prams here and that and smoking fags. You used to get told off for wrapping the swings round the frames when you were a bit younger and hunted for hanging about this one. We all shifted down the bottom park after that. You love your wee parking dens when you're a wee guy, but something changes when you enter your teenage years and you just wanted to smash them up. We reach the top park and clock it. A wooden fence, flaking and exposed, runs the length of the back perimeter of the park. The message is scrawled in 4-foot white spray painted letters. Kenzie, Azzy, Bruni, dead men walking, young toy in your area. Big Kenzie laughs and marches up to it. Shoddy work, boys. Typical YTB lazy job. We're not laughing really. That twingy paranoia has spread through us. There's no names left, but we knew for sure they'd all been here. A full squad up looking for us. Big Kenzie pulls out the roller tray for his bag and starts pouring the creosote out of it. It splashes onto the paint tray in big fat glugs. He hands me a glove and a paintbrush, and wee Kenzie the wire brush. Mind your arms and eyes now, boys. The old creosote can be nippy. It smells like fire, pure brimstone in your nostrils, thick chemicals choking you. But it takes me back years to my granny's shed. We start slopping the thick brown liquid over the fence, and wee Kenzie scrapes the hard wiry brush against the flaking surface and scrubs the paint off till it's dusty and faded. The dark brown creosote covers the remnant of the paint and our death threat begins to disappear. I glance towards wee Kenzie, whose face must be like a mirror image of my own. This was far for him to come. We knew that. Right, boys, nice even brushstrokes now, on the one direction, Big Kenzie says, with a fag hanging out his mouth, laughing casual. The two are looking at him. Bah, he says with a shrug. Wee Kenzie goes back to scrubbing the plank with a wire brush. Do you not care, Tam? I say. He turns and gives me a look, and I see his sore looking scar. Azzy, wee man, we all care. But it's not just a case of caring or no. I'm not going to sit myself for these. But a paint's not going to hurt us. Big Kenzie's face had healed, but it left him with a big tan mark, ear to lip. He lets a couple of days stubble grow in before he shaves now, and often has a parchy beard to hide the match. You're a daft Tam, wee Kenzie says. We both turn to look at him, surprised. He'd barely spoke all day. What are you talking about, kid? You're no invincible, you stupid pig. Do you not realise you've broke my mum's heart coming fading with a face like that? It scares it to look at you now. Oh, pardon me for getting slashed, you wee If you hadn't started with Devon Matty, it wouldn't have happened. You listen to me, wee bro. They animals, and if it hadn't happened to me, it would have happened to one of yous. So I'm glad it happened to me. These are still wee guys, I would have felt bad. Mate, they've not heard the last of that. They're fucking old for you, Nick. Azzy, you're going to end up getting it as well. Do you think he's a mental? Big Kenzie turns and slaps his wee brother's face. Fucking beauty. Man up, you wee G. Me and Azzy didn't fucking start this, but we've got to end it. I'm the tap man about here. Wee Kenzie's raging, holding back tears. Well, you can fucking tell my mum when you kill somebody, because I'm no ya p***. John, calm down, mate. I know you get a fright when I get slashed, but you can't just get hot and that's it and done with. I'll always need to watch now. And so the fuck will use. He's a fucking YTP now, boys. Welcome to the young team. Guys, it's crazy. It was a crazy environment back then. So let's cycle back. 2005, the World Health Organisation declared Glasgow murder capital of Europe. You know, I was involved in gangs back then. I'd started running about in young teams in Airdrie, 2003, 2004. Around that year, I remember there was 12 murders in our circumference. For a town of 100,000 people, guys, it's horrendous, you know. They were largely fueled by people carrying knives, by drink. The majority of violent homicides and violence in general was carried out by drunk people. You know, in the schools that we went to, they were split. You know, there was always an awareness of territorialism. You know, every area had a young team. Very similar to parts of Glasgow and other parts of Scotland. You know, in the young team and the young toy, I fictionalised those names. You know, the reality was they would have been the suffix and the end of the name. So if it would have been Airdrie Young Team, Coatbridge Toy, for example, you know, I wanted to make it obviously fiction. You know, the last thing I wanted to do with this novel was create a shrine or glorify it for young people. You know, so my own introduction to gangs came in those early years. And it wasn't this dramatic initiations that you see sometimes in American movies and stuff like that. It was literally just, there's all our ones hanging about in the park. We're going to go and join them with about a Buckfast or about a Mad Dog, you know, MD 2020. We were all mera peaked up, you know, we were wearing Berghaus jackets, tracksuits, Lacoste tracksuits, football tracksuits. That was the fashion back then, you know, and there'd be a crowd of guys, a crowd of girls, all the young ones aging from 12, 13, right up to 18, 19. You know, and then they would have this name, you know, they would have this group identity, you know, and ours was the Young Mavis, you know, and you start out being one of the wee guys, you know, you're just kind of hanging about with the older ones, and then your coming of age happens throughout that process. You eventually become one of the elder ones. And guys, I went through that process. You know, I started as one of the wee nippers at the beginning, you know, halfing in for 10 fags, and drinking bottles of Buckfast over a golf course, you know, and lying paralytic. And then eventually you would be a very, very violent young man. You know, there'd be all sorts of fights. Airdrie wasn't particularly regimented gang culture. It was more individual violence, if you want to call it that. It was disputes over money, drugs, women, you know, personal dislikes of people, in a kind of violent circumference. You know, and that would be the process, you know. So until ages 12 to 14, I'd be running about in the streets drinking. And the first seismic moment for me was being expelled from high school. I was involved in a violent incident in my school. I was expelled. You know, that's a real moment. And lots of people say they were expelled from school, but when you're formally expelled from school, it generates a social work report. So you need to get a social worker coming to your house. You know, you need to go up in front of the education authority. You need to go and find a new school. So I was out of mainstream education for 3 months, and then I went down to Coatbridge High instead of Airdrie Academy. And for anybody that knows Coatbridge, the gang culture was much more akin to inner city Glasgow. So they had the same group identities as we did, young teams, but the conflict between them was much, much more aggressive. It was a very, very poisonous atmosphere between the gangs. They actually hated each other. They didn't mix at all. It was like oil and water, some of these guys. And I started running about with the Lang Lone ones, which was it's a predominantly Catholic area, Coatbridge, around the Time Capsule Leisure Centre. Most people know where that is in Scotland. So I started hanging about with those guys, and that's when I really experienced a lot of the stuff that we see in the young team, that really fierce tribalism, you know. Because sometimes people say to me, "Oh, Airdrie wasn't that bad for young teams." It wasn't. The rest of the book was inspired on Airdrie. The locale, the setting of the book is absolutely Airdrie, and people recognise places, and that's of course intentional. But the conflict between the two gangs is fictional. That was a blend of my experience in these two towns. Based everything I would say in the book, even though it is fiction, is inspired by or based on something that did happen. You know, there's half truths. Is probably a nice way to say it. You know, that was my inception, and if you'd asked me back then, you know, when I was 14, 15, I thought it was amazing. You know, my dad died young, of natural causes, you know, and I think that had a huge impact on my childhood. You know, even though I wasn't really conscious of it at the time, I think when I look back on my life, you know, I didn't have anybody to play football with, so I was a wee bit alienated in that way. I wasn't really into sports. And then I was exposed to this young teen gang culture, you know, and for the first time in my life, I actually fitted in, you know, and I thought, wow, man, this is something I'm really good at, you know, and I looked like a proper little ticket, and I did. You know, and I loved being a Ned. It was, if you look back across youth culture in the UK, mods and rockers, casuals, Neds was the 90s and 90s conception, excuse me, that youth culture, you know, and that cultural emblem of Mera Peaks, Buckfast, DJ Rankin, all the things that our generation relate to. Every generation's had theirs, you know. Ned's was just ours, and it just so happened that it was a perfect storm, you know. Quite often when you're looking at a sociological or a criminology aspect, and you look at how violence occurs, we look at trauma that happened years before, you know. So massive recession in the 80s, end of heavy industry in the UK. Scotland particularly affected by mining, shipbuilding. Our communities were steelworks in Lanarkshire a lot, in the mines, etc. When all those shut, you had towns full of workers with no work, and that in these kind of places is a lethal mix, you know. So there was poverty, you know, and challenges, and there was alcoholism, and then obviously as we move forward in time for the 70s, 80s, 90s, we've got illegal drugs coming into the mix as well. You know, that sets the stage for this, you know, and for the culture that we experienced. We had that perfect storm, you know, the board was set, we had poverty, we had trauma, we had alcohol and drugs, we had a lack of opportunity. And then if you look at the crime stats for the years, violence was on the rise, you know, and it rose steadily through the 90s, and it peaked in 2005. And it gave us that title, you know, of murder capital of Europe. And that's not a title you want, you know. And this friendly madman that we laugh at, these palatable psychopaths we have in Scotland, like the Kevin Bridges jokes, you know, some of those guys were stone cold killers, you know, and I don't think that they were evil, a lot of them. I think they were just, they really challenged, came from bad backgrounds, they consumed alcohol and drugs, they carried a weapon to protect themselves, and then they met another young man from an opposing housing scheme doing exactly the same thing, or they met a random passerby, a complete innocent, and the inevitable happens, you know, violent crime, including homicide. You know, some of the papers said that they loved the mischief for the young team. Guys, I don't think the mischief is really the right word to use when you talk about this book. It was an incredibly violent gang culture, and I think that we were conditioned to be violent as part of that. You know, the violence is a factor obviously in this book, you know, and my handling of it hopefully is tactful and sensitive. The last thing I wanted to do was create this violent fantasy that you see in lots of male fiction. You know, if you're familiar with the football films, the hooligan films, Green Street and Football Factory, there's almost a kind of quasi-religious look at it, you know, that this is an amazing brotherhood and, you know, this is a great thing. Where actually the reality of violence, it's never good, you know. It's not a boxing match with a referee. It's not like you see on TV, guys. You know, it's quite often really scrappy. People get hurt. You know, you never see that. See in films and all that, you see blood coming out of people and all that, but you don't see them going home to face their mum, you know, and you don't see their mum awake at night, you know, and their son coming in with broken teeth and you having to go to the dentist to get your teeth fixed and coming in with a broken nose. You know, that was the reality of violence. You know, and guys, I was very proud of my violence when I was young, and I think we all were. You know, we used to recount stories. The young team opens with them telling stories about these mythical figures, the older ones. You know, these guys were like, you were like heroes. You know, myth and legends. That's what I talk about in the book. They were like myths and legends. We used to see their names spray painted, and you would go, "Wow, I want to be like that guy. He's a hero." You know. But that was only ever the veneer, guys. It was never the actual core that we seen back then. You know, and I was involved. I counted them all up because I've been writing a memoir recently about all the true stuff that happened, and I counted them all up, guys. And there was 16 instances of violence I was involved in. That maybe not sound like a lot, but when one punch can kill, I know two young men, friends of friends, who are both killed in a single punch. Anytime you lift your hands to somebody, it was potentially very, very serious. And then the reverse of that's true as well. Anytime you were assaulted violently, it had lethal consequences sometimes. And as I said, you know, I don't think these guys were particularly evil. I don't think they went out with the intent to kill. But, you know, that was the result of this violence, that people did get seriously injured. And there's a whole generation of young men, and older men as well, actually, in Glasgow, you know, with terrible facial injuries. You know, these tan marks, slash wounds that go right down their cheek or across their lips. You know, and you became accustomed to tell the difference between one that had been done with a bottle or one that was done with a knife. The knife ones tended to be really thick, and the bottle ones tended to be lots of jaggy lines down people's faces, equally as lethal. And guys, it wasn't the lethality of the injury, it was the lethality that these guys couldn't get a job. No, they were stigmatised as criminals. I know guys that were completely innocent. They'd never actually lifted a hand to anybody, but they'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. That old saying, and a bottle had been used against them, usually a Buckfast bottle. The bottle's burst. They've been left with these terrible scar wounds on their face. And guys, there's a lot of stigma attached to that. You know, how do these guys go and get a job then? Because they take one look at them and they go, nah, he's a gang member. You know, that's been... that. In reality, these guys are victims of crimes. You know, if you visit Glasgow, the rest of Scotland, you'll see them all over, especially in the city centre. You know, and then there's the guys you don't see, who were murdered. You know, and I know of both victim and murderer in this, and that's sadly where they go. Because at the beginning of this story, you know, we talk about wee boys and it's young team this and young team that. But as that trauma starts to compound things, you get to about 16, and then deaths start occurring. You know, I personally, we experienced drug deaths, suicides, murders, and that's when the real story of the young team starts to get a bit darker and a bit more serious. You know. And sadly that was a reality for many, many young men and women in our part of the world. The suicide rate is very high in Lanarkshire, where I'm from. It's a real black spot for that. And that's one of the main themes, you know, that recurs in the young team, is mental health. And I've got a wee reading for that later on. But the violence and suicide is the two readings that I'm going to give today, guys. You know, predominantly I would say the book concerns itself with violence and then substance abuse. You know, we're all familiar when you say drug addict, when you use that term or substance dependent, everybody's mind just goes straight to that famous book Trainspotting, and we think about heroin addiction. And see, when we were in school, we were getting social education about that. You know, when we watched videos of these wee cartoon figures jumping about, and they were meant to be your bloodstream being invaded by HIV, you know, after sharing needles or after having unprotected sex. Guys, that was the 80s, you know, that was concerned with that. And then into the 90s, our older guys, the guys who were born in the 70s and 80s, they come up in the 90s. They were Generation X. Their main they were taking ecstasy, they were going to raves, they were going to dancings, but they were also using heroin. You know, and guys, we were nose to nose with that. I seen heroin addiction point blank range. I never myself used it. It wasn't our generation that did that. We had moved on to that by then. You know, but we dealt with the legacy of it. You know, we seen it nose to nose, experienced overdose. Lots of our older ones died because of it. You know, and our drug landscape was completely different then. We really took party drugs. we were the generation of ecstasy, cocaine, speed now and again, but the majority of our time was spent taking ecstasy tablets. Excuse me. When you speak to older ones, they talk about pills, and they talk about the money involved. And they used to say it was £10 a pill or £20 a pill. When we were taking them, it was £2 a pill. You know, so your pocket money could get you 10 ecstasy tablets. And that's a big artistic focus of mine in the young team as well. Because I wanted to put onto page the crazy hallucinogenic effect of those drugs, you know, and how, and I don't mean hallucinogenic in an acid or an LSD kind of way, just the actual effect on your consciousness, you know. Taking something like 5 or 10 ecstasy tablets and sitting, you know, and the rushy feelings and sensations. And you know, it's a tightrope again, just like we spoke about with glorifying violence. You can quite easily glorify drug use, and if you look at lots of media outlets designed towards young people, they are almost always written by kids from mid or upper class backgrounds, and their attitudes to drugs are always exploratory. They're looking at drugs and substance abuse as a forbidden pleasure, not as something to manage trauma and pain, you know, as was the case with lots of heroin addicts. You know, people who take heroin are not happy people, guys. This is not a drug that you take just, excuse me, out of curiosity, you know. It tends to be a sliding scale of substance abuse where, you know, it's the drug of the desperate, you know. We were the opposite, guys. We were smoking cannabis was the way we started taking drugs. We smoked cannabis every day, you know, and we used to smoke cannabis resin, and that was imported to the UK from abroad, and it was very high quality stuff. And they stopped importing. Maybe it was cost, who knows. But there was a revolution in the way we took drugs and manufactured cannabis, and people started growing it. And it became super strength, you know, herbal cannabis that we smoked green. And that frazzled a lot of people's mental health. You know, that was really, really... They talk about THC content in resin being about 4%. It went up to 20% and more sometimes with the herbal stuff. And that's when we seen the real drugs landscape change. You know, people were taking ecstasy tablets, they were smoking this super strength green. And then ecstasy fell out of favour. You know, it became Mandy and MDMA people took. And I think that was largely because of legal highs. You know, legal highs were introduced, and that revolutionised the landscape of drugs in the UK, because you had these new creed of cheap synthetic drugs flooded, and the old drugs had to rebrand, you know, so it became Mandy, so it was pure MDMA, and then prop, so it was really high strength cocaine, high purity, high cost as well. Our grams used to cost £40, this went up to £100. You know, and the more expensive drugs are, the more violence that accompanies them, you know, and the more, that's why we're seeing more firearms incidents in Scotland now, as these young crews of guys that are dealing in these drugs are enforcing them with extreme violence, you know. And we see that transformation occur in the book, you know. We see Azzy and the young team, when they're young boys, they're taking the £2 ecstasy tablets, they're having these experiences, they're getting swept into rave culture. You know, that was a huge part of the essence of that, you know. The rave revival in the 90s, 2005, 2010, all throughout then, massive raves in Scotland. And then after that, in 2012, it started to dwindle. But these super strength drugs stayed, and this is now the landscape our young people are dealing with. This is the drugs that teachers are seeing in school. It's high strength cocaine, high strength herbal cannabis, not little bits of resin dope, you know, and this is a constantly evolving thing, youth culture. You know, so it's a funny one that the young team actually is almost like a work of historical fiction, you know, because even, I'm now 29, about 15 years older than Azzy was at the very beginning of that book, when I read you that first excerpt, you know, and things change completely. So I want to show you the range of the young team. Of course, as he grows, we meet Azzy, our narrator and our main character, when he's 14, and we're involved in the introduction to gang culture. We experience sectarianism, we experience the drugs, and And then we shift, so it goes to Azzy when he's 18. Now they're driving, they're driving about in the done-up motors with the tunes on. They're going to the big raves, and that's when things start to go a bit Pete Tong. We see the mental effects of drugs and substance abuse, with mental health at point blank range with anxiety. And then the last phase of the book, as he goes, and then he comes back, and he's drug free by this point, and now he's looking, and he's looking at the landscape almost as an outsider, and we go on a new journey with Azzy, as the inevitable gets sucked back in. The next two readings are going to talk about that, so I'm going to read for you again, guys. These two readings come for the very end part of the book, and as he's just returned from his journey away, and he's getting sucked back into the conflict and the violence. It's 2 hours later when I'm walking with the window smashing. I was dreaming and the noise wound its way in. My maw screaming broke the dream. I'm soaking with sweat and my eyes are stuck together, but I bounce up rapid and put an old Rangers tap in my trainers with no socks. I grab my bat and fly down the stairs. My maw's screaming for her bedroom. Stay in, Alan! Fuck that. I have a quick swatch at the front window before I bounce out in case there's a team waiting. There's broken glass all over the carpet and a half brick line in the middle. The Venetian blinds are all bent. I rip the door open and peer out into the darkness behind the parked motors for any sign of movement. But the street is dead. I run down the steps into the garden and bounce off the fence. I'm jogging now, right up to the end of the road. I'd parked my motor further down the street in anticipation of this. My ma's at the doorstep in her dressing gown, and a few neighbours' lights are on cause of the noise. She looks fuming. The last thing she wants is the neighbours to see me out on a rampage with a vacay bat. My ma's spitting out her firm lips. Get in here now. I keep the bat low and stand with it on the threshold. I wish someone made a run for it. I'd kill them for doing this to my ma's house. She's pulling my arm back in the door. Please come back in. Alright, I'm sorry, Mum. Second night back. 2 nights it took for this nonsense to start again. I'll move out. And where will you go? Wherever you go here, trouble's going to follow you. No, it won't. I'm going to settle it once and for all. Oh, please, Alan, don't talk like that. I didn't mean to say things like this in front of my mum. What I said in anger, she took for gospel, and it kept her up nights when I'd calmed down and was perfectly safe. She'd heard far too much violent talk across the years, talks of smashing and stabbing and revenge that would never materialise once you sobered up and your blood was wiped off you with antiseptic. Women suffered as witnesses and nurses to her wars. It was the ones who love you, who cleaned you up, and who had to deal with the aftermath time and time again. I'm sorry. I didn't come back looking for trouble, Mum. I know that, but there's idiots here that will drag you back in. You can't keep losing your temper and running out to hit folk if they throw stones at your windows, Alan. You're playing right into their hands. People can't bear to see others getting on. She's bang on. I've no protests. You had spent your full youth learning to fight and act bold. Now you have to unlearn it. Don't retaliate, even if they're right in your face and laughing at you, because the one you lift your hands to would get hurt, and you'd end up in court, and then it's finished. There would be no life beyond all this, and all the struggle is for nothing. This is a new challenge, to keep that boldness inside and let it go. You're right. I'm sorry about the windies and the blinds. I'm not bothering about those, it's you I'm worrying about. I don't want things to go back to the way they used to be. Honestly, I don't think I could manage now. Not back to all that. My ma looks older with every word that comes out of her mouth. I can't offer any guarantees what would happen. This is the woman who taught me never to make a promise if you can't keep it. I can't promise everything's going to be alright, because you just never know about here. My ma doesn't deserve all this shit. She's looking elder and less capable of putting up with it. I wasn't one of the wains with pure young parents. Some ma's are only in their early 40s when they're in their 20s. My ma's in her late 50s now, for a different time. She didn't understand all this, drugs and street violence. But she was well versed in the consequences. In the past, moments like this, I'd be raging, phoning my pals to go and cause havoc, but there's nobody really left to phone. Where's the famous young team now? I'm alone to face my past. You see a maturity, starting to come with Azzy, and he recognises that this is serious, you know what I mean? There's been serious violence up to now. He's gone away and that's afforded him great perspective in life, and it takes the reader on a new journey, by the way, because we now look at it rather than an insider but as an outsider, somebody that loves and cares about these guys, but that's moved on, but guys, even in my own life, moving on is one thing, deciding I want a different life, I want to be somebody else, I can be more than I've been, and I dream and I hope and I've got promise and talent, but making that come true and manifesting it is another story, because too many guys, really, really good guys, that I know, and myself included, I've said that, I want to change my life, I want to do something away from here, and you get sucked back in, they're still using drinking drugs, they're substance dependent, sometimes their mental health's in a bad way, they're self-medicating, and then being stuck in these environments out there, in these streets, you get sucked in, with violence, with selling drugs, and guys, those only ever end one way, the bad way, My own substance abuse ended on Christmas Eve 2012. Guys, I reached rock bottom. All that stuff I told you about, all the bravado, all the nonsense, it came to an end on that day for me because I was at rock bottom, and it was that moment of clarity people talk about. And I was in a wee flat, I had nothing, I had no money, I had no Christmas cards. And I think that's what really hit it, because I was looking about, and I used to love Christmas when I was a kid, and I was very lucky, my mum always looked after me, single parent, but always had great Christmases, good times, and I was looking about this flat in my life, and I was like, this isn't my life, this is somebody else's life, but unfortunately it's not, it's my life, and I've created this chaos, this substance dependence, this need, and this sadness, and guys, I'd be absolutely honest with you and say I didn't like myself very much. In fact, I hated myself. I didn't think I was a nice person, and I didn't think I deserved any good things. But I was very lucky that I'd discovered Trainspotting. I'd went to university, and now I was in my 4th year of uni, and everybody, says, oh, he's done brilliant, but guys, I wasn't free. I wasn't living free, because I was still trapped in a world of drugs and violence. And guys, that moment came for me, at about tea time, and I looked at my life and I went, I can't go on, and I broke down, guys, because I was looking, and it actually all started off with one of my neighbours, an elderly woman, 86 she was, came put a wee Christmas card through my door, and it said, "Love Betty, number 16, I'll never forget it." And, I broke down, and in my crazy drug-induced state, I ran out to get Christmas cards, and I said, I'm going to put them through all my neighbours' doors, right? It's going to save me, it's going to change my life. And I went away out and I couldn't get any because everything was shut. And I come back to my flat and I broke down, guys. I cried, honestly. And all the bravado, all the nonsense, all the gangs, there was nobody there apart from me. And I looked up to God and I went, I need help, please help me. And I prayed, guys. And instead of going out with a young team that night, I went to church with my mum. And the next day, I told her, something's different. My life's changed, something's going to change. And it did, because I never used drugs again, guys. I graduated that summer. And in those first few weeks of hard withdrawal, I started writing this book. 7 years later, I'm delighted to tell you, I'm 7 years off drugs. I'm nearly 4.5 years off alcohol as well. Changed my life, transformed my future. Guys, and I'm still dealing with a lot of the trauma and all the stuff I went through back then. A lot of sadness, a lot of lost friends, a lot of regrets and wasted time. But I'm trying to make amends for that in the community, and I'm going into schools, been into prison. And you're trying to prevent, you're trying to instill all this nonsense on people and say, guys, see all this that you're part of the new. It's going down, it's only going one way, trust me, and you won't like where it goes. I've been there. And that's why I'm passionate about doing these talks and being brutally honest and saying, and peeling back the bravado, guys. I talk about hard shells. I was a tough guy, jumping about in a mirror peak. Didn't have feelings, guys. Underneath, I was struggling with mental health. I was incredibly lonely, right? Because going down that path, it's a very lonely road. You know, I looked at other people's lives and I thought, I want that life. Why have I not got that? Why am I not happy? Because I didn't choose happiness. I chose something else. You know. Guys, my last reading. Again, that wee trigger warning. This one's about suicide. I should include myself in that, by the way, because one of my pals committed suicide over the summer. It's a very difficult subject to be honest about and talk about. And I'm somebody that struggles with mental health, I know. But I know how incredibly valuable it is to talk about it. And in my group chat only this week, my pals were all talking about it. You know, one of my pals has been struggling with depression and he came out in front of, bravely by the way, and commendable in front of everybody and went, I'm struggling with my mental health, guys. I need to talk to somebody about it. And, you know, see the support and the love, by the way, I got. It was heartwarming. It's making me quite emotional thinking about it. But guys, we know that there's loads of young people, men predominantly, right, that they've not got that supportive network, right? They've not got a trusted person where they can go and say, I'm really struggling now. Put their hand up and say, I need help. And guys, sometimes people do that bravely and they go to their GP and they don't get the help. They get waiting lists, they get antidepressants when they need to talk to somebody, you know. It's an epidemic, and by the way, it was an epidemic that was with us long before COVID, and I dare to say, unless we act and do something and encourage people to come forward and say, I need help, I'm struggling, it'll continue. Guys, this is my last reading. I hear my mum running up the stairs and I know something's coming. I can tell by her hurried steps, and with every one, my half dream disappears. My hand goes to the fag packet and I pull out another one and stick it in my gob and start sparking the lighter. The Elgin usually chaps the door, but today she just bursts in. I open my single eye to look at her. What is it, Mum? Get dressed, Alan. How? Just do it, will you? For sake, what's happened? Stephen's mum and dad are at the door. Finnegan? Yes, Alan. How? Because Tony Marie's killed herself and Stephen is missing. They're asking to see you right now. Get up and put some clothes on. My head's racing and I think for a minute, this is just one of the periodic nightmares creeping into a lucid dream. That isn't to be. No, this time. I drag extra hard in the smoke. This is not a drill. The stress hormones in my mind scream as I feel panicky and the regret lighting the second fag. I try to keep focused on something so I don't lose it. But I get that overwhelming feeling when you hear bad news. Pure evil washing over you and making you feel nothing but dread. I felt that feeling before. It's shock hitting the emotional seawall deep within us. These knocks desensitise you to misery, each one making you stronger and more resilient and accepting of the next, but robbing you each time of a precious piece of your humanity and future happiness. Overdose. She hung herself. Now get up and talk to Connor and Joanne. 2 minutes. Up! I stand up with a fag between my lips and hunt for a pair of trackies to pull on. There's a wee bottle of water and I'm taking a wee drink to try and separate my lips before I go in faces. I bounce down the stair, try to sort out my bedhead and rubbing sleep from my eyes. I've got a wee panicky feeling in my chest, but I'm trying to keep it down below. Times like these, you have to be strong, and I say a wee silent prayer to God to give us strength for this. My faith is buried deep within us, but I only flirt with an ocean of divine power at Christmas, maybe Easter or not. I think in passing, I do believe, because this evil isn't random. It's concentrated among for bad areas and their daily struggle additional sufferings. Days like this, faith is all you have to cling to, with fingernails if necessary. You couldn't do this alone. I'm going to jump a wee bit because he goes on to talk about the details. But the most important bit for me in this, guys, is the effect on Azzy as well. He promises to go out and look for Finnegan, her boyfriend who's missing, who's the son of these parents. I jump back up the stair and stick my old trainers and hoodie on. My mouth's still stuck together and I feel starving but sick in my stomach and all. It cramps at times like these and makes us feel like I've got an ulcer. Stress, the doctor down there said. understandable really, on days like this. You could eat a omeprazole at Smarties and it wouldn't make a bit of difference to that non-feeling buried within you. My convictions hold, but it takes a physical toll of this. And the elder you are, the worse it is, body and mind. It's all trauma, whether it's happening to you or you bear witness to it. You have to work and earn money in a stressful job and try to be an adult and have prospects and relationships and run a house. This piles on top and makes it too much to handle. It's all a matter of time and compression. Hard boiled? Aye. But how long can you resist and keep intact before the cracks start to appear? I'm past that point of no return. This is a salvage operation now. Guys, we don't escape through this life without picking up trauma. You know, and trauma's invisible wounds. And lots of young men that live this life deal with PTSD, deal with complex trauma, which is the effect of all these combined hurts, you know, for existing in a violent atmosphere, so on and so forth across the years, you know. But what I would encourage anybody to do, if you see a young man or woman struggling and they put their hand up and they ask, don't ignore it, guys, because it could save their life. And see, if you tell somebody about your own trauma, you could save your own. I'm very, very vocal about that. And, you know, I was very honest in the young team, and it's tough even for me to be honest about mental health, even though I've written about it. Because it's ongoing, guys. In periods of stress in my own life, you know, I'll struggle and I'll feel anxious and I'll know where to go to busy places. I'm scared, you know, I struggle with flying when I never used to. It can affect you in all sorts of ways. But my message to anybody is it does get better with the right conditions, you know, especially when you resolve drugs and alcohol. So, that moves us nicely on to the last part of this, which is the questions from the for some of our readers out there, for the guys in the community. So I'm going to read the question and then I'll just answer it as if somebody's asked me. It's these crazy COVID times, guys. Let me get a wee drink, sorry. So Andy from Dumbarton has asked, how much impact did Trainspotting have on you? Guys, Trainspotting was fundamental for me. I stayed on at school. We were told not to leave unless you had a job because the economy was crashing, you know, it was 2007, 2008. And so I did. And the girl sitting next to me said, what are you going to do for your personal study? Because we had to choose a book. And I says, I don't know. And I seen a boy sitting over there doing The Godfather, and I went, that might be the boy. And she said, you should do Trainspotting. And I says, that's one of my favourite films. I didn't even know that was a book. And she said, aye, it's a book. And I said to one of my friends, and she bought it for me, right, kindly. And I remember the transformative power when I opened that book and I read the sweat was lashing off the sick boy, first line. It blew me away, honestly. And it was that power of representation, because I was in the back of police motors, I was sitting in cells, I'd seen 3 of my mates just die of heroin overdoses, and then I read this book that reflected all that experience, and it told me, a gang member, a Ned, a nobody, a troublemaker, that, you know what, the world of literature's for you too. It had a massive impact. It saved my life, it transformed my future, and I give thanks to Irvine Welsh, you know, and that great book, because it changed my life. And that's the power of representing unrepresented people. That papers are far too quick to say, the people who populate this book, they won't read it. You know, it's all for us, you know, it's for middle class people. I'm calling. Alright, thank you, Andy. Jay for Clydebank said, is it difficult to write about gangs without sometimes making them seem too exciting? I think it's an absolute tightrope. You know, I mentioned a couple of titles there, and I've got a lot of time and respect for those titles as well. You know, Football Factory, Green Street, I loved them. Do I think their hand-on is tactful and sensitive always? No, not always. That doesn't make them no good films or no exciting, by the way. I love them. But when you're trying to be progressive and you're trying to change things, I think it's crucial to show beneath the hard shell. You know, so those readings I did and that honesty I offer to people when I talking about faith, talking about finding God, talking about struggling with mental health, talking about romantic relationships even, do you know what I mean? And not talking about the birds and all that, we do all that, right? That's all the banter, right? That's the pub, the lad chat. But underneath, even gang members have feelings, right? they get scared too, they get lonely, right? They fall in love, right? And that is where the true power of the young team lies, you know, because it's actually saying underneath all the hard man and all the nonsense, there's trauma, there's hurt, there's humanity. And I hope, you know, that answer can only rest with you guys, if I manage to achieve a book and a story that doesn't glorify gang culture but shows it for what it is, you know, a dangerous path with an uncertain future. So thank you, Jay. Which books would you recommend to young people who are currently reluctant readers? Ruth. Honestly, by the way, I would recommend any book to any young person, and I mean that. And I know you were looking for specific books, right? Naturally, I'd recommend A Young Team by Graeme Armstrong. I'm not kidding. But honestly, right, I remember sitting in an English class, right, and I was reading a Goosebumps book because I loved Goosebumps, right? It's a horror series by R.L. Stine aimed at young people. The standard English in them is pretty, to be honest with you. But the stories were fantastic. I loved all that. I was a right wee girl when we were young, right? We were always into ghosts and all that, and scary movies. Me and my sister loved all that, right? So see, even in high school, see if I seen a Goosebumps book, I just used to grab it, right? And I'd sit and read it, and she's like, that's not a proper book, you know, what's a proper book? To lots of people, that isn't a proper book. Too much swearing, too much this, too much that. Put a book in their hand, whatever they want to read, right? Because see, if you start reading stuff you like, eventually you will read stuff that you think you ought to read, or you will wander into a bookshop and you'll grab a book and you'll transform. You know, I read Trainspotting Irvine, Welsh, about heroin addicts in Leaf in the 80s. The next book I read was The Great Gatsby, the Roaring Twenties, you know. Any book, Ruth, thank you. Jamie's asked, how much of Azzy's life was like your own? Jamie, it's a question that I get asked all the time. And the reality is, everything within the young team was inspired by real stuff. The cavalry didn't always ride in and save the day, right? I hope you know what I mean by that, right? Fiction has to make sense, it has to be exciting, it has to make you want to keep turning pages. The reality wasn't like that often. There was loads of nothing, and then there was these crazy flashpoints, you know. I experienced gang culture, I experienced serious gang violence. I was stabbed in the back with a Buckfast bottle. I was seriously assaulted with Buckfast bottles on other occasions to my injury. Very luckily, they didn't bust, but I was hit in the face, in the back of the head. I've got scars on my back. So my exposure to gang violence was real. I was a member of two gangs. I would be absolutely honest with that. I was substance dependent. You know, all those things inspired me to create this fictional world set in a very real world with real experiences. But if you were in a young team, you know this is quite obviously fiction because of the names, the young team, the young toy. It sounds almost fake, but I wanted to make it as real as possible, saying YTP, you know what I mean? YTB. It sounds like the stuff we said. So there's truths, there's half-truths, there's shared experiences, but the majority of it I experienced. Thank you, Jamie. Liz from Dalmuir has asked, what is your next novel going to be about? I'm glad you asked. My next novel is Raveheart, so it's based... I was actually sitting talking about it with a friend today and I was getting that buzz for it. Raveheart... excuse me. Raveheart is all about dance music. There's 2 raves in the book that we go to, guys. In real life, we went to 22. I loved raving. I was an absolute cheesy quaver, hardcore raver. Renegade master. And the next book, if you ask where it sits compared to the young team, it's a comedy, guys. It's meant to make people laugh. It's not a serious thing. It's halfway between Kevin and Perry Go Large and Indiana Jones, right? DJ Wally is a hero. He's a DJ down at the time capsule on Coat Bridge. He gets sacked and he goes on a quest to reunite all his fallen heroes of dance music for the golden age. Scooter, you name it, all of those ones. So it's going to be fun. Roaring Tail. Thank you, Liz. And then Ali from Bon Hill has asked, I understand that you do a lot of talks in schools and prisons. What message do you want to give to young people about gang life? And this is a great question to end on. Guys, gangs are seductive. They exist in communities where there's not a lot of other stuff to do. Poverty in gangs is linked. But I would say, we used to think we were the tough guys, right? I used to I used to go to Boys Brigade on a Friday night, right? And then I got too cool for it, and I was like, I'm not going there, I'm going to do trips to drink the wine and fight and all that. And we used to look at the guys going into the Boys Brigade, right? And you're, you know what I mean? We're the young team, you know what I mean? I regret that so bitterly that I can't, honestly, it actually makes me want to greet. I wish I was one of the guys who had walked past us and went straight into there to play football and they hang about with the good guys, because we were the bad guys, right? And see, those young guys that were all in there, they've all got wives, they've got homes, they go on holidays, they've got fantastic jobs, they've got kids, they've had a great life because they took the right road, no the wrong road. Me and my kind, we are struggling, that's the truth. We're struggling with mental health, we're struggling to find a career, we're struggling with substance dependence, we're struggling with crime, violence, drug dealing. I'm safely beyond all that, but that doesn't mean my pals are, you know, and I'm still care about them and I'm still with them, you know what I mean? And I need to hear when things go wrong, when they get attacked, when they lose money, when they go to prison. You know, I would say to any young man, right, about gang life, if you can avoid it, guys, run. Do not stop. Keep running. Don't stop. Go and take the future that you so righteously deserve. Because see, especially down in London right now, it's out of control. You know, they are where we were 15 years ago. People are carrying knives, they're carrying weapons, they're shooting. It's all fueled by selling drugs, you know. And then my heart goes out, especially to the young BAME members of that community, because that's who it tends to affect down there. I lived in London, I've seen it with my own eyes. I lived in Wood Green and I used to go shopping in Tottenham, and that was where one of the infamous gang wars between N17 and N22 happened. There was shootings, there was a girl killed with a Mac 10 machine gun, a teenage girl caught in the crossfire. There's boys killed with shotguns, with knives. Guys, these young men deserve a future, right? Our young men deserve a future, and by the way, we are slipping back. I see it all the time. Casual culture, Green Brigade, UB07, you'll see it spray painted all over. All the young boys wearing the Stone Island again. They're drinking, they're taking prop cocaine. Guys, we're going backwards, and if you look at the trend, right, for the Office of National Statistics, right, violence has been increasing for 2014. It's a steady rising trend. It concerns people like me, you know, because we see it at street level. Politicians see it as well. Cops see it. Violence Reduction Unit sees it, and everybody. I hope we're all moving in the same direction, you know, and there's good people out there, by the way, that'll try to change lives, transform futures and save young men's lives. You know, and I'm very, very privileged and proud to have stood beside them, you know, and to help them with their work. And I hope the young team feeds into that. It was very challenging to write. It was a very lonely, hard process, guys. It took 7 years. It took 300 rejections. But I know the power of a book, because that girl who put Trainspotting in my hand saved my life. It changed my family's life. I would have been up in the cemetery, you know. I wouldn't have made it. I know that. The way I took drugs and the way I drank alcohol, I wouldn't have made it. You know, I'd have probably killed myself with that. Could have died violently. You never know. I thank God. So, I hope that's an answer. You know, that forget the glamour, forget the stuff you hear in rap songs and grime and all that. That's a glamorised portrait of where it is, because it's a very lonely, dangerous road. And when you get to the end of that road, there's sometimes no one not waiting for you. You know, all our young people deserve a future, and there's a future out there for them. Guys, thank you so much for listening. There's so much to talk about with this book, and it's a vast subject, gang culture in Scotland. There's a great history to it. There's all sorts of academic works you can read, and there's people out there that are fighting and trying to. Callum Hutchison, Nicole, I beg your pardon, Natalie McLean from Cisco. Look at these people online, guys. The Violence Reduction Unit, headed by Niven Rennie, they are trying to do something about this. They have been. We are one of the world leaders at reducing violence now in Scotland. You know, we don't want to go back. I don't think anybody wants to go back to the bad old days, you know, where our young people are carrying knives and committing violent offences and killing each other, essentially. And I hope that the young team's a small part of that solution, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you to Western Barton Libraries for asking me to do this. Thank you to everybody that's asked a question. Thank you to everybody that's watched. I hope it's of some value to you. Thank you very much. God bless.